Picture this. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Modern humans, as we know them, have existed for barely 300,000 of those years, a blink in geological time. But in that vast span before us, in those forgotten eons buried under layers of rock and silence, could other civilizations have risen and fallen? Not myths or metaphors, but advanced societies erased by time itself. In 2018, astrophysicist Adam Frank and climate scientist Gavin Schmidt posed a chilling question known as the Silurian Hypothesis. If an industrial civilization had existed millions of years ago, would we even know? The answer was unnerving. The Earth's crust renews itself, oceans swallow continents, mountains erode into dust. In a few million years, even the traces of our skyscrapers, satellites, and cities would vanish completely. So what if we are not the first? What if the great civilizations of the past, Mu, Atlantis, Hyperborea, were not legends but echoes of something real, erased by the same planet that created them? The evidence might not lie in temples or artifacts, but in chemical whispers buried deep within the soil, carbon signatures, isotopic scars, the geological memory of a forgotten world. Tonight, we follow those traces, from the silent ocean floors to the myths that refuse to die, to ask one impossible question. What if Earth's true history is far older than we think? Welcome to Historic Sleep. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now. I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. The question that began as a thought experiment has become one of the most haunting scientific riddles of our age. If a civilization as advanced as ours existed long before humans appeared, would we be able to find it? To most, the idea sounds absurd, the kind of speculation reserved for late-night documentaries and myth hunters. Yet behind this unsettling proposition lies a genuine scientific inquiry. The Silurian Hypothesis, proposed by Adam Frank, an astrophysicist from the University of Rochester, and Gavin Schmidt, a NASA climatologist. Their argument was disarmingly simple. If an industrial civilization had thrived millions of years ago, say during the age of dinosaurs or even earlier, its cities, machines, and monuments would now be gone. Plate tectonics would have swallowed continents whole, erosion would have ground stone to powder, and fossilization would have buried every trace beneath new layers of earth. The evidence, they argued, would not come from ruins or tools, but from chemistry. The fingerprint of civilization, they said, would linger in the planet's sediments and atmosphere. Tiny anomalies in carbon, nitrogen, and radioactive isotopes, the same traces our own industrial age is leaving behind right now. Imagine the world millions of years from now. Our skyscrapers have long since crumbled, glass and steel have melted back into dust. The oceans have shifted their borders, swallowing coastlines and islands. What remains of our cities is buried beneath kilometers of sediment, compressed into stone. All that endures is a faint imbalance in the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-13, a telltale sign of fossil fuel combustion. To future beings, if any survive us, our entire era might appear as a brief chemical anomaly, a thin, dark line in the rock record. Frank and Schmidt asked, could the same kind of line already exist, hidden in the layers beneath our feet? Could there have been others before us? Industrial beings who left their own invisible mark and vanished without a trace? The deeper scientists looked, the more they realized how fragile human memory truly is. The oldest oceanic crust on Earth is barely 200 million years old. Anything older has already been recycled into the mantle through subduction. Even on land, erosion reshapes the surface every few thousand years. Rivers carve valleys, winds erase mountains, and glaciers scrape continents clean. In geological terms, permanence is an illusion. A civilization could flourish for tens of thousands of years and still vanish utterly, leaving nothing but whispers in stone. If that sounds implausible, consider how quickly our own legacy would fade. If humanity disappeared tomorrow, nature would reclaim everything. Within a century, cities would be forests of rust and vines. Within a few thousand years, concrete and asphalt would crumble. Radioactive waste might persist, but even that, over spans of millions of years, would decay into stability. By the time a new intelligent species evolved, the only proof we ever existed might be microscopic layers of synthetic chemicals locked within rocks. So, if we can barely guarantee our own remembrance, what chance would a civilization from 100 million years ago have? That question opened a door to a chilling possibility. The geological record is not a history book. It is an act of constant erasure. The deeper we dig, the more we find voids, gaps where entire epochs might have been rewritten by cataclysm. What if beneath those voids lies the story of another species, one that mastered technology long before primates learned to walk upright? To test this idea, Frank and Schmidt examined the planet's chemical history for irregularities, moments when carbon levels, temperature, or radiation spiked inexplicably. They found one event that fit eerily well: the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, or PETM, which occurred about 56 million years ago. For reasons still debated, global temperatures suddenly rose by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. Massive amounts of carbon flooded into the atmosphere, and the oceans became acidic. The spike lasted for over 200,000 years, altering the climate and reshaping life itself. Could that have been the footprint of a vanished civilization? Mainstream geology says no. The most accepted explanation is that volcanic eruptions or methane hydrate releases caused the carbon surge. Yet the coincidence remains unsettling. The PETM carbon pattern mirrors, on a geological scale, the same kind of rapid CO2 rise we are producing today. To imagine that it might have happened once before, long before humans, feels like looking into a mirror tilted toward prehistory. But if such a civilization did exist, who were they? The Silurian Hypothesis took its name from an old Doctor Who storyline about a race of intelligent reptilians who lived on Earth before humans and went into hibernation deep underground. Frank and Schmidt used the name partly as a joke, yet it became an irresistible metaphor. In the vast tapestry of Earth's history, why couldn't intelligence have arisen more than once? Evolution does not move in a straight line. Intelligence is not inevitable, but it is not unique either. Consider this. Complex life has existed for over 500 million years. Dinosaurs dominated the planet for more than 160 million of those years, nearly 1,000 times longer than human civilization has existed. Within such a span, could evolution not have produced a species with technology, even briefly? Paleontologist Dale Russell once proposed a thought experiment about Troodon, a small bird-like dinosaur with unusually large brain capacity, forward-facing eyes, and grasping hands. If it had continued to evolve, he speculated, it might have become something humanoid, a creature capable of building, thinking, communicating. He called it the dinosauroid. The idea was dismissed as fanciful, but it hints at something profound. Intelligence may not belong solely to humanity. It could be a recurring phenomenon, one that rises, burns bright, and disappears over and over, leaving nothing but shadows in the rock. If such beings once existed, their physical remains would be almost impossible to detect. Fossilization requires rare, specific conditions: rapid burial, absence of oxygen, and stable sedimentation. Most organisms that ever lived left no trace at all. Even if an industrial civilization had existed for thousands of years, the odds of its artifacts surviving and being found are astronomically low. The Earth erases itself again and again. But chemistry, as Frank and Schmidt argued, never lies. Industrial activity alters the balance of isotopes in ways that nature rarely reproduces. For example, the burning of fossil fuels enriches the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-13. Synthetic fertilizers leave distinctive nitrogen-15 patterns in soil. Nuclear reactions generate isotopes like plutonium-244, which do not occur naturally in significant amounts. These are the silent fingerprints of civilization, marks that might endure even when stone and metal are long gone. If another species once filled the skies with smog or poisoned their seas with synthetic compounds, the clues could still be buried deep in ancient sediments. And perhaps, in some forgotten layer, those clues already exist. Of course, skeptics counter that similar chemical anomalies can arise from natural causes. Volcanic eruptions release massive CO2. Methane bursts from the ocean floor mimic industrial emissions. The line between natural catastrophe and technological footprint can blur beyond recognition. Yet the question remains haunting, because it reframes human civilization itself as temporary, a geological episode that will vanish as completely as all the others before it. Imagine digging into Earth's crust 100 million years from now and finding a thin, dark layer, the Anthropocene stratum. You would see traces of plastics, strange isotopes, and carbon spikes. You might call it the industrial layer, a moment when some unknown species transformed its planet. Then, nothing. Silence again. Another extinction, another reset. And if that has already happened once, or more than once, then our place in history is not the beginning of civilization, but one in a long chain of forgotten worlds. The Silurian Hypothesis is not just a theory about the past. It is a mirror held to our future. It asks whether the marks we are leaving, the warming, the carbon, the radioactive dust, will be all that remains of us. It dares us to imagine Earth not as a stage for humanity, but as a living organism with its own cycles of creation and erasure. Civilizations rise, burn, and are folded back into the soil. And perhaps, in the distant future, another species will dig through the layers and ask the same question we ask now. Were we ever truly alone? Or are we simply the latest echo of an ancient rhythm, one that has played and vanished countless times before? If Earth's memory could be read like the pages of a book, the first thing we'd notice is how much has been torn away. Each layer of rock is a fragment of a sentence in a story we can no longer fully understand. For every fossil we find, 1,000,000 others have dissolved into dust. For every trace of life we uncover, entire epochs have been lost to fire, water, and time. The planet keeps rewriting its own history, leaving behind only faint hints of what once was. When scientists speak of lost civilizations, they often do so cautiously. But beneath their skepticism lies something more profound than disbelief. It's the recognition of just how fragile evidence is. To find any sign of civilization in the deep past would be like recovering a single letter from a book burned to ash. Yet even in that ash, there might be meaning. The deeper one studies Earth's geology, the more apparent it becomes that the planet is not static. It breathes, shifts, and transforms itself through processes that can erase entire landscapes. Volcanoes consume continents. Oceans rise and fall, swallowing coastlines. The slow grinding of tectonic plates can hide a mountain range beneath a sea or raise an ancient seabed into the sky. To us, these cycles seem eternal, but to the Earth, they are simply the rhythm of life. Frankenschmidt's proposal began with this realization. If our entire modern civilization can vanish without a trace in a few million years, how could we possibly know if something like it once existed before us? To answer that, they began to search for the only kind of evidence that time cannot easily erase: chemical fingerprints. Every civilization leaves behind a signature in its environment. Humans have filled the air with carbon dioxide, littered the oceans with microplastics, and altered the isotopic balance of countless elements. These are not artifacts you can hold, but patterns you can measure. Carbon-12, the isotope found in living organisms, has increased dramatically relative to carbon-13 because of our burning of fossil fuels. If another species had burned its own version of oil millions of years ago, that same imbalance might be found frozen in ancient sediments. Other clues might come from nitrogen isotopes. Industrial agriculture today leaves a clear excess of nitrogen-15 in soils, a result of synthetic fertilizer use. If such an anomaly appeared in prehistoric rock layers, it would suggest that some kind of biological manipulation, some attempt to grow food on a massive scale, was happening long before us. Even more intriguing are radioactive isotopes. When humans split atoms, we create isotopes that do not exist naturally in significant amounts: plutonium-244, cesium-135, iodine-129. Their half-lives are measured in millions of years. If a previous civilization had harnessed nuclear energy or fought wars with such technology, faint residues of those isotopes could still be embedded deep within the Earth's crust. This idea sounds like science fiction, but it's precisely what Frank and Schmidt asked. If there was once an industrial civilization before us, could we find it not through ruins, but through the chemistry of rocks? The implications were staggering. Suddenly, events like the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, the mysterious spike in carbon and temperature 56 million years ago, could be reinterpreted as possible traces of something more than geology. Perhaps the Earth itself is haunted by memories of civilizations it has already buried. But not everyone agreed. Geologists countered that such events could easily be explained by natural causes: volcanic eruptions, methane bursts, or asteroid impacts. To them, the idea of an ancient industrial civilization was unnecessary. The planet was perfectly capable of warming itself without help from machines. Still, the question persisted, because nature and intelligence often leave similar scars. Both can reshape the world with catastrophic force. Both can end in extinction. And both, in their own way, tell us that we are not as exceptional as we believe. If there was a civilization before us, what form could it have taken? The first possibilities that come to mind are familiar. Reptilian species like those imagined in science fiction, or intelligent descendants of dinosaurs such as Troodon, the small, sharp-eyed predator whose brain-to-body ratio was astonishingly high. In the 1980s, paleontologist Dale Russell speculated about what might have happened if Troodon had not gone extinct. His dinosauroid was a thought experiment, an upright, tool-using being with large eyes, nimble hands, and a mind capable of abstraction. It was never meant as literal truth, but it captured something real. Evolution repeats patterns when conditions allow. Intelligence is not a miracle, it is a strategy. Suppose a line of animals evolved intelligence 70 million years ago. Suppose they built, created, and transformed their world. Then, as happens so often, a cosmic accident, an asteroid, a flood, a planetary shift erased them. Their monuments crumbled, their machines corroded. Within a few million years, even their bones had vanished. The surface of the Earth restructured itself. New species evolved, unaware that beneath their feet lay the dust of a civilization that once reached for the stars. That is not fantasy. It is inevitability. The same will happen to us. Perhaps the most unsettling thought is not that we are unique, but that we are temporary. Across geological time, civilizations could rise and fall like waves, each cresting, breaking, and vanishing into the next. Earth's history could be a cycle of rediscovery and loss, each new intelligence inheriting a planet cleansed of its predecessors' remains. Some scientists have even speculated that if such cycles exist, the planet's recurring mass extinctions might not be random. Perhaps each wave of intelligence pushes the environment past its breaking point, triggering a collapse. If so, what we call natural extinction events could be the quiet aftermath of ancient civilizations destroying themselves. The fingerprints we search for in rocks might not just mark their existence, but their final mistake. Of course, there's another way to interpret the evidence. Maybe the signs of intelligent life are not buried in the past, but spread across the planet in forms we fail to recognize. Consider fungi, organisms that form vast underground networks capable of communication, adaptation, and memory. In recent experiments, slime molds have solved mazes, predicted patterns, and distributed resources efficiently without any central brain. To some researchers, they represent a different kind of intelligence, one that grows, connects, and endures rather than conquers. Could such an intelligence have existed in the deep past? A civilization not made of cities and machines, but of living networks spanning continents, an ecosystem that was itself the civilization? If so, its extinction would not leave behind metal or plastic, but faint biochemical anomalies, molecules out of place, organic structures fossilized in patterns too regular to be chance. Even now, when we study the Earth's oldest rocks, we find microscopic structures whose origins we cannot explain. Spiral imprints, lattice formations, mineral veins shaped by processes that seem biological but do not match any known organism. Most are dismissed as natural oddities. But what if some of them are not? What if those spirals are signatures, echoes of a world that thought in ways we cannot comprehend? The Silurian Hypothesis invites us to look at the Earth not only as a record of natural events, but as a palimpsest of intelligence. If intelligence has evolved before, it may not have looked like us. It may not have spoken, built, or written, but it may have changed the chemistry of its world, just as we have. And yet, even as we search for others, the deeper question haunts us. Why do we need to know? Perhaps because the possibility of predecessors forces us to confront our own impermanence. If others have lived, created, and perished, then our civilization too is only a phase. A brief experiment in a vast laboratory called Earth. In that sense, the Silurian Hypothesis is not merely about finding evidence, it is about humility. It reminds us that the story of life on this planet is not a linear ascent toward us, but a cycle of creation and oblivion. Our towers of glass and steel, our satellites and data streams will all become sediment. And one day, if someone else digs deep enough, they may find the trace of our presence in a thin layer of darkened clay, and wonder who we were. The Earth, silent as ever, will keep her secrets. But if we listen closely, beneath the hum of our machines, we might hear the faint echo of those who came before, a civilization erased by time, yet written in stone. In every age, humanity looks backward and wonders how much of history we have truly remembered, and how much we have simply rewritten. The further we dig into the planet's past, the more we discover that time is not linear, but layered, a series of civilizations and cataclysms piled on top of each other. What if buried deep within those layers lies the record of another world? One that thrived, advanced, and vanished long before we appeared. This question is not only about science, it is about memory, how Earth itself remembers, and how easily those memories fade. The crust of the planet is not a permanent archive. It is a restless surface that constantly erases and renews itself. Mountains rise, oceans expand, ice melts, continents drift. Each of these transformations acts like a cosmic editor, deleting paragraphs from the book of time. If there ever was a page describing a civilization before ours, it would have been torn out, scattered, and rewritten in rock and sediment. To imagine such a civilization, we must first imagine a time when the Earth itself looked entirely different. The continents we know today, Asia, Africa, the Americas, are not eternal shapes, but fragments of ancient supercontinents that came together and broke apart over billions of years. Gondwana, Pangaea, Rodinia, each one hosted forms of life that thrived and disappeared. During those long ages, the atmosphere changed again and again. Oxygen rose and fell. Temperatures shifted between inferno and ice. The stage for intelligent life was set more than once. Could it be that intelligence walked upon that ancient ground and was then swept away as if it had never existed? In 2018, when Frank and Schmidt published their thought experiment, they knew how radical it sounded. Yet their logic was grounded in cold realism. Civilization is not immortal. It is chemical. It burns fossil carbon, alters nitrogen cycles, releases isotopes, and reshapes its environment in measurable ways. That is its signature, its footprint in geological time. The challenge, then, is not proving that such a signature could exist. It's finding whether one already does. Their paper suggested a method. Instead of searching for lost temples or artifacts, look for chemical fingerprints, those impossible-to-erase signals that hint at industrial-scale activity. If ancient beings once mined, smelted, or synthesized, traces of their work could still be buried in sediment cores. If they created synthetic compounds, plastics, alloys, or radioactive materials, some of those elements might have long half-lives, surviving through the ages. Even today, we can measure layers of soot and carbon from human industry that will outlast us for millions of years. The question becomes, How deep must we dig to find something like that again? In the fossil record, there are strange interruptions, moments when global chemistry shifted abruptly, leaving behind chemical scars that seem to defy natural explanation. One such event was the Great Oxygenation over 2 billion years ago, when Earth's atmosphere suddenly filled with oxygen due to microbial photosynthesis. It was a revolution that wiped out most existing life, but set the stage for others to thrive. Another anomaly, far more recent, is the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, that great burst of carbon and heat that transformed the planet 56 million years ago. For hundreds of thousands of years afterward, global temperature remained dramatically higher. The source of all that carbon is still debated. Could that event have been the echo of an ancient industry, one that rose and fell before mammals ever dominated the land? It is tempting to dismiss the thought, but then again, so many of our certainties crumble under scrutiny. For example, the oldest known tools once dated to 2.5 million years ago, but new discoveries pushed that date back to 3.3 million, made not by humans, but by an earlier species. Each time we find evidence of intelligence in the past, the boundary of civilization shifts. If pre-human species could carve stone, organize hunting, and perhaps communicate symbolically, what prevents us from imagining a much earlier leap of complexity, one erased by geological time? What if the first civilization was not human at all? Paleontology offers occasional glimpses of possibility. In 2021, researchers studying Maiasaura fossils, the so-called good mother lizard, found patterns of nesting behavior suggesting advanced social organization. The species returned to the same nesting sites each year, cared for its young collectively, and lived in cooperative groups. This was not mere instinct. It was planning. It was memory. The Maiasaura were dinosaurs, yet their behavior resembled that of elephants or primates. Then there was Troodon, the bird-like predator whose brain was large enough to rival that of early mammals. It had stereoscopic vision, grasping hands, and, most intriguingly, a capacity for problem-solving. Dale Russell's speculative dinosauroid was an attempt to imagine how such intelligence might have evolved if the Cretaceous extinction had never happened. A species upright, articulate, perhaps even capable of language. Critics dismissed it as fantasy. Yet the fossils remain, silent witnesses to potential unrealized. If creatures like these had tens of millions of years more to evolve, who can say what they might have become? The Earth has hosted intelligent life before. It simply did not survive long enough to leave monuments. But there are traces, not of tools or machines, but of something deeper. Fossilized soils rich in metallic oxides, mineral seams that seem to have been heated unnaturally, sudden isotope spikes that cannot be fully explained by volcanoes or meteor impacts. Mainstream science attributes them to natural processes, but the record often reads like an interrupted story, a build-up, a climax, a sudden silence. And then there are the myths, ancient whispers of civilizations that predate humanity itself. From the Popol Vuh of the Maya to the Enuma Elish of Mesopotamia, countless creation texts speak of worlds that rose and fell before ours. The gods destroy, and the cycle begins again. Could these myths be echoes of something real? A cultural memory inherited from survivors, or from some primal instinct encoded in consciousness itself? Even Plato, in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, described Atlantis not as legend, but as history. preserved by Egyptian priests who remembered the floods that erased it. According to him, it was a great island beyond the Pillars of Heracles, greater than Libya and Asia combined, a civilization that fell in a single night. Scholars call it allegory. But what if it was memory? The strange thing about these myths is their consistency. Across continents, they describe not one lost city, but a pattern, a rise in knowledge, a betrayal of nature, a cataclysm. The earth cleanses itself, and the story restarts. The Silurian Hypothesis echoes the same rhythm, but in scientific language. It does not name gods or floods, only carbon isotopes and tectonic shifts. Yet at its heart, it tells the same story. Civilizations are not permanent. They are seasonal. In that light, the ancient disasters recorded in rock, the Permian extinction, the Triassic eruptions, the ice ages, may not just be natural convulsions, but the punctuation marks of forgotten worlds. There is a chilling symmetry in all this. We too have altered the planet's chemistry. We too are burning our mark into stone. The layers we leave behind, plastics, radionuclides, altered sediments, will one day be read by whatever comes after us. And perhaps, when they study those marks, they will ask the same question we ask now. Who were these creatures, and what destroyed them? The Silurian Hypothesis does not insist that ancient civilizations existed. It simply refuses to rule them out. In doing so, it redefines how we see time, not as a straight line from primitive to modern, but as a loop, spiraling through cycles of creation, hubris, and collapse. Perhaps the reason we have found no proof of ancient intelligence is not that it never existed, but that it was never meant to last. The planet renews itself by forgetting. The oceans reclaim, the mountains grind, and memory turns to dust. What remains are only clues. A spike of carbon here, a layer of ash there, the ghost of an age erased before ours began. Maybe somewhere deep beneath the crust, below the reach of our drills, there still lies a fragment of that first experiment. A shard of alloy that should not exist, a pattern in the isotopes too precise to be chance. A whisper that says, "We were here before you, and the earth has already forgotten us." And if that whisper is real, then everything we believe about being the first might just be another illusion. One more story written on a page the earth will soon turn. The human mind struggles to grasp deep time. We can imagine centuries, perhaps millennia, but millions of years stretch beyond the reach of emotion. The distance between the age of dinosaurs and the rise of modern humans is so immense that even the mountains have changed their shapes, the oceans have rewritten their boundaries. Yet the Silurian Hypothesis forces us to face that abyss directly. It whispers that history might not be linear, but recursive, that Earth could be a stage where civilizations appear, vanish, and reappear in new forms, each unaware of the one that came before. When Adam Frank and Gavin Schmidt introduced their theory, they weren't suggesting lizard people ruled the planet or that alien ruins lay buried under the Sahara. Their real question was simpler and more haunting. If we were gone tomorrow, what would be left of us? If an advanced civilization arose 50 million years from now, could they ever know we existed? Their calculations said no. Every skyscraper, every ship, every fragment of art would disappear faster than we dare to imagine. Within a few thousand years, metal corrodes. Within a million, rock swallows every trace. Within 10 million, even the continents themselves drift away from memory. This realization flips the question back toward the past. If the Earth can erase us so easily, how many others could it have erased before? It's not about believing in mythic lost continents. It's about recognizing the limits of evidence itself. What we call the beginning of civilization might simply be the last reset after countless forgotten experiments. Geology provides the stage for this drama of forgetting. Beneath our feet, tectonic plates grind slowly against each other, devouring the surface layer into the molten mantle. The ocean floor is constantly renewed. No seabed older than 200 million years still exists. Land masses, too, are in flux. What was once mountain becomes valley. What was once desert becomes sea. The process is so gradual that it feels like eternity, yet in the cosmic clock, it's the blink of an eye. If an ancient city stood where the Pacific now spreads, it would long since have been melted and reforged, its stones reborn as lava or sediment. The very processes that make the Earth habitable also make it forgetful. Erosion, fossilization, and subduction are nature's methods of cleansing the slate. The longer a civilization lasts, the more thoroughly it is erased. Ironically, the more ancient an intelligent species was, the less likely we are to find its remains. For this reason, Frank and Schmidt turned their attention to what cannot be erased: the planet's chemistry. Every civilization interacts with its environment. It leaves behind a unique chemical signal, a fingerprint written not in architecture, but in isotopes. Humans, for instance, have altered the carbon cycle by burning fossil fuels, producing an unmistakable excess of carbon-12 compared to carbon-13. This imbalance is now embedded in soils, oceans, and the atmosphere. Long after our buildings vanish, that ratio will remain. Imagine another intelligent species doing the same millions of years ago, perhaps mining its own version of coal, smelting metals, or producing synthetic materials. Even if their technology bore no resemblance to ours, the environmental impact would be the same. A sudden spike in greenhouse gases, a layer of pollutants, an abrupt change in isotopic ratios. These are not human artifacts. They are the signature of civilization itself. And yet, to identify such a signature in the geological record is nearly impossible. Natural processes produce similar patterns. Volcanic eruptions can mimic industrial emissions. Asteroid impacts can scatter metals that resemble waste from mining. The planet's own behavior disguises its history, blurring the boundary between natural catastrophe and technological collapse. Still, anomalies persist. In certain ancient sediments, scientists have discovered thin layers of carbon-rich clay, indicating intense global heating and mass extinction. The most famous of these events, the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, remains unexplained in full detail. For 200,000 years, the Earth's temperature soared by up to 8 degrees Celsius. Oceans acidified, species vanished, and ecosystems collapsed. The level of carbon released matches, astonishingly, what modern industry is producing today. The difference is only in the time scale. We've done in 2 centuries what nature, or perhaps someone else, took millennia to achieve. Could this ancient carbon surge be evidence of a pre-human civilization? Frank and Schmidt themselves admitted that the possibility, however remote, cannot be ruled out. It's not proof, but a question mark carved into the rock. Even if that theory were true, physical remnants of such a civilization would be gone. Artifacts decay, and fossils are rare. Most organisms never fossilize. Only a tiny fraction are preserved under precise conditions. A metal tool buried in soil would corrode entirely within a few million years. Concrete would revert to limestone. Plastics would degrade, leaving only faint molecular traces. Unless an artifact were deliberately sealed deep underground or on another planet, no structure could survive the planet's endless recycling. So where else could we look? Perhaps not for ruins, but for patterns. Across human prehistory, strange correspondences link ancient cultures separated by oceans and millennia. The pyramids of Egypt, Mexico, and China share uncanny alignments and proportions. Megalithic sites from Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge are built with astronomical precision. In the highlands of Bolivia, at Pumapunku, massive stone blocks fit together with machine-like accuracy, as if carved with tools beyond their time. Conventional archaeology attributes these similarities to independent innovation or coincidence. But others see something deeper, echoes of a knowledge older than history itself. It is tempting to interpret these patterns as fragments of a forgotten global culture, remnants of a mother civilization that once spanned the earth before being erased. Myths from every continent seem to remember it. The Sumerians spoke of gods descending from the sky to teach civilization. The Maya told of ancestors who came from a land swallowed by the sea. The Polynesians remembered islands that vanished beneath waves. Even Plato's account of Atlantis fits the same pattern, a radiant empire undone by its own pride, lost overnight beneath the ocean. Could these be symbolic retellings of an event that really happened? Perhaps the last great reset before recorded history began? Of course, mainstream science dismisses such stories as allegory, but mythology has always been a vessel for memory. Long before writing, stories were how humanity preserved truth across generations. When dozens of cultures separated by oceans describe floods, celestial teachers, and lost homelands, we are right to wonder whether something deeper binds those tales together. Perhaps the ancient storytellers did not invent the past. They inherited it. The Silurian Hypothesis gives scientific language to the same intuition. It asks us to imagine time as sedimentary layers of civilization, each rising, peaking, and falling, each leaving only a chemical trace for the next to find. Our layer, the Anthropocene, is already forming. It will be recognizable by its radioisotopes, its plastic polymers, its sudden shift in carbon ratios. To future geologists, human or otherwise, it will appear as a thin, dark boundary between epochs. The question is, will there be another layer above ours someday, formed by another species asking the same question we do now? And if they find us, what will they think? Will they see us as gods, monsters, or merely ancestors who failed to listen to the planet's warning? It's unsettling to realize that we may be both the evidence and the experiment. Every action we take today, every barrel of oil burned, every forest cleared, contributes to the record that will define our age. We are engraving ourselves into the Earth's skin, one irreversible line at a time. But if intelligence has indeed emerged before, then extinction may not be the end. It may be the rule. Civilizations, like species, might be part of the planet's metabolism. They bloom like coral reefs, flourish briefly, and collapse, feeding the next cycle of life. The very act of becoming industrial may contain the seed of self-destruction. We dig, burn, and consume until the balance tips, and then nature reclaims everything. Maybe that's why no ancient civilization has been found, not because none existed, but because all must vanish in the same way. The planet cleanses itself with every age. To imagine that is to confront our own reflection in deep time, a fleeting species building towers of glass over the bones of forgotten empires, believing itself eternal. The earth smiles faintly beneath us, knowing how the story ends. Somewhere, buried under miles of rock, perhaps lies the residue of another age, its carbon, its metals, its secret signal lost in the noise of eons. And if one day we uncover that signal, faint but undeniable, it will not just change history. It will humble us. It will remind us that we are not the beginning of the story, only the latest paragraph, written in dust, waiting to be erased by wind and time. The more we gaze backward into the geological abyss, the more it feels as though the Earth itself is keeping secrets. Every fossil, every layer of sediment, every ripple in stone tells a story that begins far before humanity, and perhaps before memory itself. But the deeper scientists dig, the less they find, and that absence becomes its own mystery. The Silurian Hypothesis did not arise from fantasy. It came from frustration, the recognition that the planet is far better at erasing than remembering. If traces of past civilizations have been wiped clean, then what remains are only hints, fragments, distortions, echoes carried through myth, chemistry, and inexplicable artifacts. Sometimes what survives doesn't fit the timeline we have built for ourselves. Take, for example, the sudden appearance of complex structures at sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Carbon dating places it at around 11,600 years old, long before the rise of agriculture or known cities. Massive stone pillars arranged in concentric circles, carved with images of animals and celestial symbols, stand in defiance of everything we thought we knew about prehistory. How did hunter-gatherers, supposedly lacking agriculture or metallurgy, construct a site so precise, so heavy with symbolic geometry? Mainstream archaeology calls it the cradle of civilization. But what if it was a rebirth instead? A monument built upon the fading memory of a lost world? Every discovery of this kind nudges the same uneasy question. Are we truly the first? The planet's surface offers strange contradictions. In Bolivia, the site of Pumapunku reveals megalithic stones cut with machine-like precision, interlocking H-shaped blocks that fit together as if manufactured. In Lebanon, the Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek rests upon foundation stones weighing over 800 tons each, the size of small houses. Even with today's technology, moving such monoliths would challenge engineers. So how were they placed thousands of years ago? Archaeologists argue for clever ancient techniques: ramps, rollers, manpower. But the perfection of these cuts, the uniformity of the stone, the almost mechanical precision hint at knowledge we no longer possess. Perhaps that knowledge did not originate with us. Perhaps it was a gift or a remnant from a civilization that rose before the Ice Age floods rewrote the face of the world. Those floods appear again and again, not only in myth, but in geology. Around 12,800 years ago, at the end of the last Ice Age, something catastrophic happened. The Younger Dryas period began, a sudden plunge back into near-glacial conditions. Temperatures fell dramatically, megafauna vanished, and early human cultures such as the Clovis in North America were abruptly extinguished. The cause remains debated. Some point to a massive comet impact, others to the collapse of ice sheets and the resulting floods. Either way, the event reshaped continents. Vast torrents scoured the land, carving canyons and plains in mere weeks. Now imagine that civilization, any civilization, existed before that deluge. Its cities would be gone, its knowledge drowned, its monuments buried beneath layers of mud and rock. Only myths would remain. And indeed, myths are what survived. Nearly every ancient culture tells of a flood that ended an age. In Mesopotamia, it was Utnapishtim, saved by the gods in a great boat. In India, Manu was rescued by the fish god Matsya. The Greeks told of Deucalion and Pyrrha. The Maya spoke of a world destroyed by water. Even the Bible's account of Noah echoes the same story. A global reset. For centuries, scholars treated these as allegories. But if so many civilizations separated by oceans tell the same tale, perhaps it was not metaphor, but memory. In this light, the Silurian hypothesis merges with legend. What if the floods remembered in myth were not divine punishment, but the last chapter of an earlier technological age, an age erased by its own ecological collapse? The parallels are too haunting to ignore. We, too, are warming the planet, melting ice caps, and destabilizing weather patterns. If our civilization were to fall tomorrow, what would future beings find? A thin layer of carbon-rich sediment, plastic molecules fused into rock, and scattered radioactive isotopes, evidence of our rise and fall condensed into a geological whisper. Now imagine the same signature, buried deep in a layer 56 million years old. Could that be someone else's Anthropocene? To imagine that possibility is to confront a truth about time itself. Evolution does not favor memory. It favors survival. Every species, every civilization is an experiment. Most end in extinction. Only the earth endures, patient and unhurried, recycling the remnants into something new. Perhaps this is why the search for ancient civilizations must go beyond archaeology. We may need to think like detectives investigating a crime scene millions of years cold, following chemical clues, reconstructing motives, and learning to read the Earth's silence as evidence. Let's look at one such clue. Isotopic anomalies. These are subtle imbalances in atomic ratios within rock layers. In several ancient strata, scientists have found spikes of carbon-12, exactly the isotope associated with industrial activity today. The Paleocene-Eocene event remains the most dramatic, but smaller anomalies exist in other epochs as well. They are brief, intense, and unexplained by ordinary volcanism. To some, they are simply nature's chaos. To others, they are fingerprints of something that once burned, built, and perished. Another kind of clue lies in extinction patterns. Mass die-offs tend to follow specific signatures: warming, ocean acidification, species migration, and sudden changes in sediment composition. Some researchers argue that at least one of these events, the Permian-Triassic extinction 252 million years ago, bears marks not of random catastrophe, but of rapid chemical imbalance, the kind produced by large-scale industrial processes. Of course, no one claims machines caused the Great Dying. Yet the chemical resemblance is uncanny. Perhaps civilization, once born, is destined to destroy its own biosphere. Perhaps that is the universal law of intelligence. It consumes until balance breaks, and then nature resets. In that sense, the Silurian hypothesis is less about the past than about the mirror it holds to the present. Still, some prefer to dream rather than despair. They imagine that traces of those who came before might still exist, not as fossils but as whispers, technological remnants preserved by accident or design. Deep under the oceanic crust, untouched by erosion, there may lie metallic compounds that should not occur naturally. In ancient lava flows, there could be artifacts fused into stone. On the Moon or Mars, where erosion is minimal, a probe or fragment might still wait, its creators long forgotten. If such evidence were found, it would rewrite everything we believe about ourselves. Yet perhaps the most enduring legacy of any civilization is not material at all. It is myth. What if our ancestors' stories, of gods descending from the sky, of worlds destroyed by fire or flood, are fragments of that earlier cycle? The Sumerian king list speaks of rulers who reigned for tens of thousands of years before the flood. The Mayan Popol Vuh describes successive creations of humanity, each wiped out by catastrophe. Even Plato's Atlantis, often dismissed as allegory, begins with the claim that Egyptian priests preserved the memory of an earlier world, destroyed in a single night. What if all these accounts share a common root, a prehistoric memory passed through oral tradition from the survivors of an event we have forgotten? If so, then the story of human civilization might not begin in Mesopotamia or the Nile Valley, but in a much older, submerged chapter, a cycle of rise, hubris, and collapse that repeats itself whenever intelligence overreaches. To grasp this possibility is both humbling and liberating. It reminds us that the universe is vast and patient, that life may emerge, learn, and perish many times without ever leaving a permanent mark. It also warns us the signs of collapse are not unique to myth. They are visible today in the rising heat, the melting ice, and the restless seas. Perhaps we are not only studying the end of ancient worlds, we are rehearsing our own. And still, there is beauty in this pattern. Every civilization, no matter how brief, leaves something behind, a trace of creativity, of thought, of longing. Whether carved into stone or encoded in DNA, that spark travels forward, reshaping the next form of life. Maybe that is the real continuity, the invisible current of awareness moving through the ages. The Silurian Hypothesis is not merely a theory about vanished empires. It is a meditation on impermanence, on the way the universe hides its greatest stories in plain sight. When we gaze into the stars, we search for others like us. But perhaps the first aliens we should look for are beneath our feet, ancient earthlings who reached for the same dream, burned too bright, and vanished into the soil. If their traces are ever found, they will not be grand ruins or shining monuments. They will be data, tiny, stubborn, almost meaningless until you connect the pattern. A layer of strange isotopes here, a chemical spike there, a silence between extinctions that feels deliberate. And when the pattern finally clicks, it won't be revelation that overwhelms us. It will be recognition. The quiet understanding that we are not the beginning nor the end, but one pulse in the long heartbeat of the earth. To understand how civilizations might vanish without a trace, we must first accept a truth that feels almost unbearable. The planet does not remember us. Earth is not a museum. It is a living organism. It regenerates, recycles, and forgets. What we call history is only the thin skin of the present. Everything beneath it has been crushed, melted, or transformed beyond recognition. Every grain of sand once belonged to something ancient, a mountain, a bone, perhaps even a monument. But time grinds all things to dust, and that dust becomes the foundation of something new. The deeper one studies geology, the clearer it becomes that permanence is an illusion. Even the most enduring civilizations, if given enough time, dissolve into the elements. The Silurian Hypothesis begins from this terrifying simplicity. It suggests that industrial civilizations might have risen long before us, and that we would never know, because the evidence would have been erased by the planet itself. That idea does not come from fantasy or myth, but from a scientific understanding of entropy. Over millions of years, everything is recycled. Mountains are weathered, ocean floors subducted, and continents reborn. Imagine a city, a vast metropolis, gleaming and advanced, filled with life. Now imagine it 1,000,000 years later. The towers have crumbled, the metal has rusted away, the streets are buried beneath forests. 10 million years pass. The landscape rises into hills, erodes, and sinks again. 50 million years later, molten rock replaces the foundations. The city is gone. Not ruined, not forgotten, simply erased. This process does not only erase matter, it erases meaning. The traces of thought, of imagination, of culture, all that once defined a civilization, become nothing more than subtle chemical signals in ancient stone. That is why, according to Frank and Schmidt, any evidence of a pre-human civilization would be nearly impossible to find. The Earth has deleted its own history many times. What remains are fragments, anomalous carbon levels, sudden extinction events, strange isotopic signatures that don't quite fit the pattern. Each anomaly could have a natural explanation, but what if some of them don't? Among geologists, there is a concept called the geological record gap, the missing pages in Earth's diary. These gaps exist everywhere, from shallow seabeds to mountain strata. They represent periods of time where sedimentation stopped or eroded completely, leaving no record. Entire eras can vanish this way. If an intelligent species had existed during such a period, the silence that follows would not be evidence of absence. It would simply be the price of time. In this silence, myth begins to speak. Ancient cultures all over the world tell stories of gods who taught humanity arts and sciences, then disappeared. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, those who came from the sky. The Dogon people of Mali spoke of the Nomo, amphibious beings who descended from a star in the Sirius system. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs worshipped Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who brought knowledge and then vanished across the sea. What connects these myths is not their detail, but their rhythm. An age of enlightenment, a catastrophe, and a memory of teachers who were not human. To dismiss them entirely as fantasy is easy. To interpret them as distorted echoes of an ancient civilization, perhaps one erased by cataclysm, is harder, but not impossible. Even the Earth itself seems to hint at cycles of rise and fall. Consider the great extinction events, 5 in total, recorded across 500 million years. Each wiped out over 70% of species on the planet, and each was followed by a burst of new life. The Permian extinction, 252 million years ago, was the worst. Nearly all marine life vanished, and the atmosphere filled with toxic gases. Scientists attribute it to volcanic activity and climate change, yet the isotopic evidence reveals something peculiar: a rapid spike in carbon dioxide, methane, and heavy metals consistent with massive industrial combustion. No one is claiming factories caused it, but the chemistry is disturbingly familiar. It is as though the Earth itself repeats the same story: creation, expansion, collapse, renewal. The rhythm is unmistakable. And if intelligence is part of nature, not an exception to it, then perhaps this pattern is not unique to biology, but to consciousness itself. Civilizations, like stars, might flare and fade according to a natural law. Some scientists have started to explore this idea beyond Earth. The astrobiological Copernican principle suggests that if intelligence can emerge here, it can emerge elsewhere, and likely has many times. But it also implies something darker. If the universe is full of civilizations, why don't we see them? This paradox, known as the Fermi paradox, has haunted astronomers for decades. The Silurian Hypothesis offers one possible answer. Maybe we can't see them because they all disappear. Maybe every civilization is temporary, each one erasing itself and being erased by its planet in turn. If so, then Earth may not be alone. It may simply be typical. We, like those who came before, are building the conditions for our own disappearance. The thought is uncomfortable, but it carries an unexpected kind of beauty. To exist at all, to rise from dust, to create art, to look up at the stars and wonder, is already miraculous. The tragedy is not that civilizations die, but that they forget. The Earth remembers only through patterns, through chemistry, through the slow dance of elements, and we have only begun to learn how to read its memory. Some researchers have suggested unconventional methods to search for traces of deep-time intelligence. One approach is to analyze isotopic layers for signs of synthetic materials, molecules that do not occur naturally, such as certain plastics or fluorocarbons. Another is to scan for radioisotopes that have half-lives spanning tens of millions of years, such as plutonium-244. If we ever found a concentrated deposit of such isotopes in an ancient geological layer, it could indicate something extraordinary, a prehistoric nuclear event, or perhaps even energy production by intelligent design. Others look beyond Earth. The Moon, with no atmosphere or tectonic activity, preserves the scars of time far better than our planet. If an earlier civilization once ventured into space, its remnants might still lie there, undisturbed for eons. Similarly, Mars, though hostile, may contain artifacts preserved in permafrost or volcanic ash. We often look outward for alien civilizations, but perhaps we are their descendants, and the story began here, long before we learned to call it home. The danger of such speculation, of course, is that it blurs the boundary between science and mythology. Yet both are forms of storytelling. Both try to make sense of silence. The Silurian Hypothesis sits between them, asking not whether gods or aliens once ruled the Earth, but whether the planet itself has hosted intelligence more than once. And what if it has? What if the true history of life is a cycle of awakening and erasure, a repeating dream in which the same story plays out again and again in different forms? Perhaps intelligence is not a triumph, but a phase. Each time it emerges, it transforms the world too quickly, destabilizes the balance, and is swallowed by the chaos it creates. The survivors, if there are any, carry fragments of memory, which evolve into myths. When a new species rises, it finds those myths and mistakes them for imagination. It's a poetic loop, but one that feels eerily plausible. When ancient texts speak of ages of man, gold, silver, bronze, and iron, they may be describing not human epochs, but cycles of civilization itself. Each age rises, reaches mastery, and falls into ruin, leaving the next to begin anew, always thinking itself the first. The Earth's silence, then, is not emptiness. It is wisdom. It is the quiet voice of a world that has seen everything before. When we drill into ancient ice cores or study sediments from the sea floor, we are not just doing science, We are eavesdropping on that silence. We are listening for echoes of ourselves in the deep past. The faint isotopic shifts, the unexplained anomalies, the patterns that don't fit. These may not be random. They may be the planet's way of whispering, "You are not the first, and you will not be the last." It is both a warning and a promise. Because even if everything we build is destined to crumble, the cycle itself continues. Intelligence will return, perhaps in another form, perhaps in another species. And when it does, it will dig into the same soil, find the same mysteries, and wonder, as we do now, who came before us? What did they know? And how did they disappear? Perhaps that is the true continuity of civilization, not buildings or records, but curiosity, the same eternal question echoing across epochs. And so the search continues. Not because we expect to find cities buried in stone, but because the act of looking connects us to everything that has ever been. To study the past is to recognize our fragility. To imagine predecessors is to understand our future, and to accept the possibility that the earth has forgotten others before us is to realize how small and how sacred our moment truly is. We may never find proof of an ancient civilization, but the search itself may be enough, for it reminds us that we are part of a continuum, not its culmination. The earth does not remember names or monuments, but it remembers patterns. And somewhere, deep beneath the crust, the trace of every spark that ever lit the darkness still glows, waiting for the next civilization to find it, and to ask the same question all over again. Every civilization believes it is the center of history, the culmination of progress, the final form of intelligence. But what if this belief is simply a recurring illusion, one that every world experiences before the end? The Silurian Hypothesis forces us to confront that uncomfortable thought. It asks us to imagine that humanity is just the latest expression of a much older pattern, a temporary flare of awareness destined, like all before it, to fade into the geological record. We measure time in centuries, maybe millennia. The Earth measures it in cycles, glacial, tectonic, cosmic. And when measured in those scales, everything we know, the empires, the religions, the machines, compresses into a whisper, a single layer of dust. In 100 million years, there will be no Rome, no New York, no pyramids or satellites. There will only be a thin, dark band of carbon, the residue of our fires. To future beings, that band might look like a scar, a moment of fever in the Earth's long dream. That realization is both humbling and liberating. If we are not the first, then intelligence itself may be part of a planetary rhythm, a phenomenon that emerges when the conditions are right, transforms the world, and then dissolves back into the soil. Each civilization believes it is unique because it cannot see what came before. The Earth is its own amnesiac storyteller, erasing every chapter as it writes the next. In the fossil record, we can see this rhythm everywhere. Each mass extinction, each sudden burst of biodiversity, each mysterious anomaly in temperature or chemistry could represent not just natural change, but the reset of civilization itself. The Silurian Hypothesis doesn't claim this is true. It simply insists that we cannot be certain it isn't. The challenge, of course, lies in finding evidence that survives. Ruins crumble, metals oxidize, plastics decay. But chemistry remembers. When humanity burns fossil fuels, it releases carbon that has been buried for hundreds of millions of years. That carbon has a distinctive isotopic signature, lighter, richer in carbon-12 Then carbon-13. It seeps into every corner of the biosphere: oceans, air, plants, and animals. Long after our monuments are gone, that isotopic fingerprint will remain, locked in rock. Now imagine the same signature buried deep within the strata of an ancient epoch, say, during the Paleocene or the Carboniferous. What would it mean? Volcanic activity can mimic such changes, but the pattern would be different. Industrial civilization creates abrupt, global shifts in multiple elements at once: carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, even radioactive isotopes. To a geochemist, it would look like a sudden, coordinated distortion, one that no single volcano or meteor could produce. So far, we have not found such a pattern. Or perhaps we have, and we have not yet learned to recognize it. Geological data is vast and incomplete. For every core sample taken, there are millions of square miles unexamined. Most of the Earth's history remains physically unreachable, buried under kilometers of rock or ocean. The absence of evidence, as the saying goes, is not evidence of absence. And there are places, odd, silent places, where evidence might still hide. The deep ocean floor, for instance, accumulates sediments slowly and evenly, layer by layer. Each centimeter represents thousands of years. If a previous civilization had existed and collapsed, its chemical fingerprint might be preserved there, sealed away in darkness. Similarly, in arid deserts or beneath glaciers, remnants of strange materials could lie entombed beyond erosion's reach. Some scientists have begun to look at these regions with fresh eyes. The idea of stratigraphic archaeology, reading the layers of Earth like the ruins of cities, has become a new field of study. Instead of pottery shards and bones, the artifacts are isotopes and minerals. Instead of temples, the ruins are layers of altered soil. The questions remain the same. Who built this, and why did they fall? But perhaps the most haunting evidence is not physical at all. It is psychological. Across every culture, every age, we find the same motif: the world destroyed and reborn. Floods, fires, divine punishments, and golden ages lost. The details differ, but the rhythm never changes. Myth, in this view, is the Earth's collective memory, a dream passed from one species to the next, a whisper of what came before. Plato's Atlantis is only one of many examples. In Hindu cosmology, the Manvantaras describe repeated cycles of creation and destruction, each governed by its own humanity. The ancient Egyptians spoke of Zep-Tepi, the first time, when gods walked among men before a great flood ended their age. The Hopi people of North America tell of 4 worlds, 3 destroyed, 1 reborn. Even the Bible echoes this pattern, its flood story eerily mirroring those of Sumer and India. Could these be cultural fossils? Mythic transmissions from survivors of previous ages? If civilizations have risen and fallen before, their final moments might live on as stories encoded in human consciousness. Not in books or tablets, but in archetypes and dreams. This idea may sound mystical, but psychology has long understood that trauma leaves marks deeper than memory. Collective trauma, shared across generations, transforms into myth. What if extinction itself imprints consciousness in the same way? What if humanity carries, somewhere in its psyche, the echo of worlds destroyed before ours? When we look at modern civilization, the feverish consumption, the environmental collapse, the race toward self-destruction, it feels eerily familiar, as though history is replaying itself. Perhaps it is. Perhaps the pattern is woven into the very logic of intelligence. Consider this. To become a civilization, a species must learn to manipulate energy on a global scale. It must extract, transform, and burn. But the more energy it controls, the faster it destabilizes its environment. The act of becoming technological is the act of approaching extinction. This feedback loop might explain not only Earth's missing civilizations, but also the silence of the cosmos. Everywhere, across time and space, intelligent life might emerge, consume, and vanish before it can spread its story to the stars. This is known as the Great Filter, the idea that there is a barrier every civilization encounters, one that prevents it from surviving long enough to become interstellar. It could be war, ecological collapse, or something intrinsic to consciousness itself. The Silurian Hypothesis reframes that idea. What if the Great Filter is not in the future, but in the past, and we are simply reliving it again? It's a sobering thought, yet it gives meaning to our search, because if we can recognize the pattern, maybe we can break it. Perhaps that is why this theory resonates so deeply. It is not just a question of whether ancient civilizations existed, it's a mirror held up to our own fragility. If the Earth has seen intelligence before, and if every iteration ends the same way, then we are standing at the threshold of that same choice, to repeat the cycle or to transcend it. Science offers one kind of answer, philosophy offers another. But perhaps the truth lies somewhere between them, in humility. To accept that we might not be the first is to release the illusion of permanence. It is to see ourselves not as rulers of history, but as participants in a vast ecological drama that began long before us and will continue long after we are gone. It also redefines the meaning of discovery. Maybe we will never find ruins of ancient machines or monuments buried beneath the crust. But the real discovery might be this realization that we are temporary, that intelligence is not the goal of evolution, but one of its fleeting expressions. The universe, it seems, prefers cycles to conclusions. And yet, even as we face that truth, we continue to build, to dream, to reach for the stars. Perhaps that, too, is part of the pattern, the defiant impulse of consciousness to leave a mark, however brief. The same impulse that may have driven our hypothetical predecessors to create, to destroy, and to vanish. Maybe the true legacy of every civilization is not its architecture or technology, but its yearning, the ache to understand where it came from, to push beyond its own horizon. That yearning might be the only thing that survives the reset, carried forward in the DNA of whatever life emerges next. If that is true, then the search for ancient civilizations is not about finding proof. It's about listening to the earth, to myth, to silence. Listening for the faint heartbeat that echoes through time, reminding us that we are not the first to ask who we are, and we will not be the last. And so we dig. Not because we expect to find answers, but because the act of searching makes us part of the story. In every drill core, every myth, every whisper of carbon, we are touching the edge of something vast, the memory of a world that lived, dreamed, and vanished, only to dream again. Maybe the truth was never meant to be known. Maybe it was meant to be remembered, like a warning carved into the bones of the planet. Civilizations come and go, but the earth endures. And somewhere in that endurance lies the only immortality that matters. If the earth hides its past beneath stone and ocean, then perhaps the stars hold its reflection. Every time humanity lifts its eyes to the night sky, it is, in a sense, searching for itself, for proof that intelligence is not a cosmic accident. Yet, as our telescopes grow sharper and our instruments more sensitive, the silence becomes more profound. The cosmos seems empty, unresponsive. No radio signals, no transmissions, no galactic monuments, nothing. This absence is known as the Great Silence, or more formally, the Fermi Paradox. In a universe that should be teeming with life, where are all the others? We search for alien civilizations across billions of light years, but perhaps the first evidence of them lies buried in the rocks beneath our feet. That is the unsettling possibility the Silurian Hypothesis whispers. Maybe the aliens we seek are simply earlier versions of ourselves. The more we learn about other planets, the more plausible that becomes. Mars, for instance, was once warm and wet, with rivers, lakes, and possibly even oceans. Its surface bears scars that suggest flowing water persisted for hundreds of millions of years. Venus, too, might once have been habitable before a runaway greenhouse effect turned it into a furnace. What if both worlds hosted civilizations that followed the same path: industrial growth, ecological collapse, extinction, and left behind only chemistry? Perhaps we are witnessing that same trajectory play out again, right here, right now. Scientists sometimes refer to this as the planetary intelligence cycle. In its early phase, a planet is raw and unstable. As life emerges, it gradually regulates the environment. Forests absorb carbon, oceans balance temperature. Then comes the technological phase, when a species learns to harness energy directly. At first, this brings prosperity, but soon, the very tools that sustain civilization begin to destabilize the system that gave birth to it. If the species cannot adapt, the balance collapses, the cycle restarts. Viewed this way, the Silurian hypothesis becomes a kind of ecological cosmology. Intelligence is not the goal of evolution. It is a catalyst for renewal, a spark that burns too brightly to last. Every industrial civilization, whether on Earth or beyond, may face the same fate: to flourish briefly, alter its world irrevocably, and vanish, leaving only isotopic whispers in its planet's crust. And perhaps that is why we find the same story told across cultures: the rise and fall of divine beings, the destruction of golden ages, the cleansing floods. The myths may be poetic renderings of this very process, encoded not in data but in memory. The gods are simply the echoes of civilizations that came before, their powers remembered as miracles because their science was forgotten. Take, for instance, the myths of the Andes. The Inca spoke of Viracocha, a white-robed figure who emerged from the depths of Lake Titicaca after a great deluge to teach humanity how to build, farm, and calculate the stars. In Mesopotamia, Enki, the god of wisdom, saved humanity from a flood and brought knowledge of architecture and law. In Polynesian lore, Tangaroa descended from the heavens with the gift of navigation. Always the same pattern: destruction, renewal, knowledge restored. These tales may be remnants of a cultural inheritance stretching back further than we imagine, a memory of cycles so ancient that they survived only as symbols. If so, then human history is not an origin story, but a continuation, an echo of something the planet itself has done countless times. The more we search, the more we encounter hints that resist simple explanation. In 2019, a team studying deep-sea sediments in the South Atlantic found layers of plutonium-244, an isotope that does not occur naturally on Earth except in trace amounts from cosmic dust. Its concentration was far higher than expected. Could this be evidence of ancient supernova fallout? Almost certainly. But the possibility, however remote, lingers. What if it's residue from something else, something synthetic, ancient, and long erased? Or consider the Antarctic ice cores. They preserve atmospheric history with astonishing precision. In certain layers, scientists have found chemical anomalies, spikes of nitrate and sulfate that suggest massive combustion events. Most are attributed to volcanic eruptions or meteor impacts, but one layer, dated roughly 50,000 years ago, contains ratios that don't quite match known natural phenomena. Could it be coincidence? Almost certainly. But again, the doubt remains. The beauty and the terror of the Silurian Hypothesis lies in that uncertainty. It tells us that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It forces us to look at the world not as a static archive, but as a living system with selective memory. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote that forgetting is not weakness, but strength, the ability to move forward, to create anew. Perhaps Earth itself forgets for the same reason. Each civilization leaves its mark, burns too hot, and collapses. The planet erases the scars, and life begins again. If so, then the Earth is not just a cradle. It is a teacher, and its lessons are written not in words, but in cycles. We, like our imagined predecessors, stand at the precipice of transformation. Our industry has altered the climate, shifted the oceans, and changed the chemistry of the air. We have entered the Anthropocene, the epoch in which human activity becomes a geological force. In millions of years, this will be visible as a dark line in the rock, the same way we now see the boundary that marks the extinction of the dinosaurs. That line will be our monument. But perhaps it doesn't have to end there. If we can learn from the possibility of forgotten civilizations, if we can read their silence as warning instead of mystery, maybe we can break the cycle. The first step is to recognize our fragility, to see that intelligence does not grant immunity from nature, but deeper responsibility to it. In that sense, the Silurian Hypothesis is not a theory about the past, but a mirror held up to the present. It asks whether we, too, will become a layer of carbon and ash, a faint chemical whisper to be puzzled over by future beings. Or whether we can choose another path, one that remembers rather than repeats. Perhaps the future will not find us buried in rock, but living among the stars. To survive, a civilization must learn not only to build, but to adapt, to exist in harmony with its planet rather than in conquest of it. Maybe that is the true filter that few civilizations ever pass. Not the ability to create technology, but the wisdom to outlast it. And if one day we do endure, if humanity learns to live beyond collapse, we will look back at our own myths, our own silences, and see them for what they truly are, the echoes of a long lineage of intelligence that began long before us. The Anunnaki, the gods, the lost empires, perhaps they were not supernatural beings, but ancestors, bound to the same cycle we are only now beginning to understand. In the end, it doesn't matter whether they existed or not. What matters is that we listen to the stories, the rocks, the air, the subtle tremor of memory running through the bones of the planet. Because somewhere in that whisper lies the truth of what we are. Not the first civilization, not the last, but the latest expression of a dream the Earth has dreamed many times before. If we fail, the planet will forget us as it forgot them. But if we learn, If we understand that intelligence is not ownership but stewardship, then perhaps for the first time, the cycle will break. The Earth will remember not destruction, but balance. And maybe millions of years from now, when another species looks up at the stars and wonders if it is alone, it will find our signal, our faint, enduring message buried in the light, and know that we were here and that we finally learned to stay. Every question about ancient civilizations eventually turns into a question about ourselves. What do we really want to find when we dig into the Earth's past? Proof of others, or proof that we are not alone in our destiny? The Silurian Hypothesis began as a scientific inquiry, but it has evolved into something far larger, a reflection on the nature of civilization itself. It asks whether intelligence is a miracle or a mistake, whether it represents progress or recurrence. Humanity has long believed that history is a straight line, a ladder climbing toward enlightenment. But the evidence, both scientific and mythological, suggests something different. History may be circular. Civilizations rise, master their environment, and collapse, only for new ones to emerge, unaware they are repeating an ancient pattern. The planet, indifferent and eternal, simply absorbs the lessons and starts again. The philosopher Giambattista Vico once described this phenomenon as corso e ricorso, the course and recourse of history. According to Vico, human societies move through recurring cycles: creation, order, decay, and chaos. The pattern resets endlessly because the same flaws, greed, hubris, violence, are written into the human condition. The Silurian Hypothesis extends this logic beyond humanity itself, suggesting that the Earth might have seen not just cycles of culture, but of consciousness. Each time intelligence appears, it follows the same trajectory: discovery, expansion, collapse, erasure. We can trace the remnants of these cycles not only in myth, but also in matter. Deep beneath the oceans, core samples reveal repeating anomalies, tiny chemical fingerprints of upheaval. Layers rich in carbon, sulfur, or heavy metals alternate with periods of stability, like breaths of the planet. Each spike represents catastrophe, followed by regeneration. Some are volcanic, some extraterrestrial, but others remain mysterious, as though the planet itself is hiding the evidence of its previous inhabitants. If the Earth has forgotten entire worlds, what chance do we have of remembering ourselves? Every civilization leaves behind a record of its priorities. The ancient Egyptians carved their eternity into stone. The Sumerians etched theirs in clay. Ours, ironically, is written in plastic, concrete, and digital code, materials that will not survive as long as we think. Even now, data centers consume unimaginable energy, their servers humming like mechanical hearts. Yet all it would take is a few centuries of neglect for them to vanish. Hard drives corrode. Magnetic tapes decay. Within 1,000 years, our digital history would be nothing but dust. And then, what would remain of us? Future geologists might find the Anthropocene boundary, that unmistakable dark layer filled with microplastics, isotopic anomalies, and artificial compounds. They might conclude that a global civilization once existed, briefly transforming the biosphere before disappearing. But beyond that, there would be no trace of who we were, what we believed, or what we dreamed. The thought is sobering, but it is also strangely comforting. It means that even the greatest empires are temporary, that the arrogance of eternity is an illusion. It means that life itself, not civilization, is the true constant. Still, there are places where memory lingers. In the deserts of Egypt, half buried under sand, the Sphinx stares across time, its face eroded but still present. In the jungles of Cambodia, Angkor's temples are reclaimed by roots, yet still whisper the geometry of belief. Perhaps our world, too, will leave such ghosts, ruins not yet dust, faint outlines of who we were. And perhaps those who come after will feel the same awe we feel when we stumble upon ancient stones and realize someone was here before us. The Silurian Hypothesis invites us to imagine that feeling magnified across epochs. What if we are already standing atop the ruins of forgotten ages, their stones transformed into the continents themselves? Every handful of dirt, every mountain peak, might contain the ashes of cities we will never know. This idea is not entirely foreign to science. The fossil record itself is filled with absences, missing intermediaries, sudden appearances, inexplicable extinctions. The Cambrian explosion, for instance, saw an unprecedented burst of complexity around 540 million years ago, when most major animal groups appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Biologists explain it as a convergence of environmental factors: oxygenation, climate stability, evolutionary innovation. But one could just as easily see it as the aftermath of a great reset, a new experiment emerging after an unrecorded collapse. Similarly, the end of the Permian period erased over 90% of life. What if that was not just a natural extinction, but the planet's way of clearing the slate after one of its own civilizations exceeded its limits? Of course, this is speculation. But speculation is how discovery begins. For the first time in history, humanity has the tools to test such questions scientifically. We can scan the chemical archives of the Earth, model atmospheric changes millions of years old, and even identify synthetic molecules in ancient strata. Already, researchers are developing algorithms to detect technosignatures, the chemical traces of industrial activity, whether on Earth or distant exoplanets. The same techniques we use to search for alien civilizations might one day reveal evidence of our own forgotten ancestors. And if we find nothing? That, too, would be an answer. It would mean that we are alone, not because intelligence is rare, but because survival is. The silence of the past would then become a warning, not an absence. It would remind us that we are living through the same experiment that has failed many times before. Imagine, for a moment, a future civilization, whether human or something evolved from us, uncovering a fossilized layer rich in plastic polymers and isotopic distortions. Imagine their scientists debating its meaning. Was it a brief industrial phase? Was it deliberate? Was it natural? The irony is that we are those scientists now, gazing at the ancient Earth and asking the same questions. The circle closes. But there is another, more spiritual interpretation of this cycle. Perhaps the purpose of each civilization is not survival, but awakening. To glimpse, however briefly, the interconnectedness of all things. Every rise and fall might bring the planet closer to balance, teaching the same lesson through different voices. Intelligence, then, would not be an accident but a form of planetary consciousness, an awareness that manifests, burns, and returns over and over until it learns how to endure without destruction. If that is true, then we are not merely studying history. We are participating in a cosmic ritual. Each civilization, like each species, is a step in the evolution of awareness. When one falls, another inherits its memory in fragments, through myth, through instinct, through the quiet persistence of life. Perhaps that is why so many myths end not with apocalypse, but with rebirth. The floodwaters recede, and new land emerges. The fire burns the forest, and new shoots appear. The gods depart, but humanity endures. Even the Sumerian king list, which records reigns lasting thousands of years before the flood, continues afterward with human kings. The story never ends. It only transforms. Maybe the same will happen to us. Maybe we are the inheritors of a forgotten age, the next link in an endless chain. And one day, when the earth is ready, another will follow us. They will find traces of our presence in the air and the sea, and they will wonder, as we do now, who came before. To accept this is to see the world differently. The mountains become tombs of time. The oceans become archives. Every stone, every atom carries a memory older than humanity itself. We are not separate from it. We are part of it. And perhaps that is the real message hidden within the Silurian hypothesis. Not that others once existed, but that we belong to something far larger than our species. Civilization is not a human achievement. It is an earthly phenomenon. It rises wherever life gains the ability to reflect upon itself. It is as natural as erosion, as inevitable as decay. If that is true, then our duty is not to defy the cycle, but to understand it, to learn how to live within it without becoming its next casualty. The ruins of the future are already being built, but so too are the seeds of what will come next. Our legacy will not be our technology or our monuments, but the way we choose to live in harmony or in denial of the planet that made us. In the end, the Silurian hypothesis is not about aliens or dinosaurs or mythical gods. It is about time and humility and the terrifying beauty of impermanence. It reminds us that we are temporary, but not meaningless. Every civilization leaves behind not just destruction, but resonance. And in that resonance, the earth remembers, if only for a moment. Perhaps that moment is enough. To imagine that civilizations rise and fall across deep time is to reimagine the planet itself, not as a backdrop to human history, but as a protagonist, endlessly rewriting its own story. The Silurian hypothesis suggests that intelligence may be a recurring phenomenon, one that the Earth cultivates and erases as part of its own evolution. It's a haunting idea because it transforms extinction from tragedy into rhythm and civilization from achievement into pattern. For most of human history, we believed we were exceptional. We called ourselves the measure of all things, the pinnacle of nature's design. But the geological record humbles that belief. It reveals an Earth billions of years old, with epochs of complexity that predate us by unimaginable spans. It reminds us that what feels eternal is only temporary, that permanence is an illusion created by the brevity of our perspective. When Adam Frank and Gavin Schmidt proposed the Silurian hypothesis, they weren't looking for Atlantis or the Anunnaki. They were testing the limits of scientific memory. Could a civilization as advanced as ours leave any detectable trace after tens of millions of years? Their conclusion was unsettling. Almost nothing would survive. Not the buildings, not the machines, not even the bones, only the chemistry would remain. Tiny distortions in the isotopic record, subtle anomalies in carbon and nitrogen, perhaps a faint residue of synthetic compounds. Civilization, in other words, would reduce to a fingerprint in stone. This raises a deeper question. If the only proof of existence is a chemical signature, then how many other civilizations might have already come and gone, unrecorded and forgotten? Perhaps the planet has cycled through intelligence countless times, each one rising to mastery, altering the atmosphere and vanishing. Perhaps evolution is not a ladder, but a spiral, forever turning back upon itself. Geology, after all, is the study of forgetting. Every mountain range was once ocean floor. Every continent has been submerged, fractured, or fused. The rock record is less a chronicle than a palimpsest, its pages endlessly erased and rewritten. Even fossils, those most enduring symbols of memory, are rare exceptions. For every organism preserved, billions more vanish without trace. If civilizations existed before us, they would be subject to the same amnesia. Their monuments would crumble, their metals would corrode, their cities would sink beneath rising seas. Over millions of years, pressure and heat would transform them into new minerals, indistinguishable from natural stone. The planet, in its slow respiration, would inhale their remains and exhale new landscapes. Yet perhaps the earth leaves hints, small, persistent whispers. In the geological column, there are sudden bursts of activity, rapid carbon spikes, inexplicable warming events, mass extinctions followed by accelerated recovery. The Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum is the most famous example, but there are others, smaller, older, more mysterious. Each one could represent natural upheaval, or something else entirely. If there was once a civilization before ours, it would have faced the same challenges we face now: resource depletion, climate change, ecological collapse. To build industry is to alter the environment, and to alter the environment is to risk extinction. The pattern is almost mathematical. Intelligence leads to technology. Technology leads to transformation. Transformation leads to instability. Instability leads to renewal. Perhaps that is why the cosmos seems silent. Maybe every civilization reaches a threshold where it either learns to live within the limits of its planet or perishes. Maybe most fail. The Great Filter, as some call it, may not be a cosmic barrier at all, but a biological law, the inability of intelligence to coexist with its own power. In that sense, the Silurian Hypothesis is not only about the past, it is about the mirror it holds to our future. If we are the latest iteration of a recurring experiment, then our task is to learn what the others could not. To build not for conquest, but for continuity. To leave not destruction, but balance. The lesson may already be written in the myths we dismiss as fantasy. Across cultures, ancient stories warn of civilizations destroyed by their own arrogance. The Tower of Babel, Atlantis, the Mahabharata's weapons of the gods. These narratives, stripped of supernatural ornament, describe precisely the pattern we now recognize: technological hubris followed by collapse. They are not predictions, they are memories. Maybe that is why these myths feel so familiar. On some deep level, we recognize ourselves in them. We know how the story ends because we have lived it before. If this is true, then intelligence itself may be a form of planetary memory. Each time it arises, it recovers fragments of the past, not through fossils or ruins, but through intuition, through story, through the universal ache of remembering something we never lived. The myths of golden ages, lost continents, and sky-born gods could be the collective echo of civilizations erased by time. Consider the Sumerian tablets, which describe 8 kings ruling for hundreds of thousands of years before a flood swept over the earth. Or the Mayan Popol Vuh, which tells of earlier races of beings destroyed for failing to honor creation. These are not isolated tales. They are cultural fossils, the residue of forgotten ages. Perhaps they preserve the memory of an earlier world that fell as ours might fall. Modern science hesitates to entertain such thoughts, not because they are impossible, but because they cannot yet be tested. But the boundaries between myth and evidence are not as rigid as we assume. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe, the sudden reclassification of Neanderthals as intelligent toolmakers, the revelation that humans interbred with multiple hominin species, all remind us how fragile our understanding of history truly is. Every generation rewrites the story of the past. Perhaps the next will rewrite it once again, uncovering signs that intelligence has bloomed here before. But even if no such signs exist, the act of searching transforms us. To look for predecessors is to confront our own impermanence. It forces us to imagine a world where our achievements are dust, where our monuments are forgotten, and where our only legacy is the chemical scar of our existence. In that realization lies both humility and hope. Humility because we understand that we are temporary. Hope because we recognize that intelligence, though fleeting, always returns. The universe does not abandon consciousness. It reinvents it. Life finds new forms, new vessels, new voices. The planet does not mourn its lost civilizations. It remembers them through the life that follows. This perspective changes everything. It reframes human progress not as domination, but as participation. We are not separate from the Earth's cycles. We are part of them. Our technology is not alien to nature. It is nature exploring itself. Every city, every machine, every satellite orbiting the planet is a continuation of the same biological impulse that built coral reefs and spider webs. The difference is scale, not essence. If intelligence is a planetary process, then our fate depends on whether we can align with that process instead of opposing it. To endure, we must evolve beyond extraction and exploitation toward symbiosis. We must learn to think like a planet, to see the world not as a resource, but as a system of relationships. Some scientists already speak of this in terms of Gaian feedback, the idea that Earth's biosphere regulates itself through countless interactions between life and environment. When we understand ourselves as part of that feedback loop, we begin to glimpse what the next stage of civilization might look like. Not industrial, not post-industrial, but integral. A civilization that leaves not scars but gardens, not isotopic chaos but equilibrium. Perhaps this is the true test of intelligence, to become a force of balance rather than disruption. If earlier civilizations failed, it may be because they reached this crossroads and chose power over harmony. Their memory, erased yet whispered through time, urges us not to repeat their choice. And so the Silurian Hypothesis becomes more than speculation. It becomes philosophy. It asks us to see ourselves not as a singular event, but as part of an ongoing experiment, a cosmic rhythm in which awareness continually awakens, falters, and renews. We may never find the ruins of our predecessors, but if we listen carefully, we may feel their presence in the rhythm of the waves, in the heat of the air, in the deep hum of the planet that has seen this story unfold countless times before. They are not gone. They are within the earth, within us, written into the same matter that dreams and destroys. And perhaps one day, we will become the memory that shapes the next age, the whisper in the rock that tells another civilization, "We were here, we made the same mistakes, learn from them." In that way, even extinction becomes a form of communication, a message carried forward through time. Every civilization leaves something behind, not artifacts, but understanding. The Silurian Hypothesis, in its deepest sense, is not about what has been lost, but what can still be learned. If we heed its warning, we might finally escape the loop. If we ignore it, we will become another layer in the stratigraphy of forgetfulness. Either way, the planet will go on. The stars will continue to shine. And somewhere, life will rise again, curious as ever, wondering who came before. There is a quiet moment that comes at the end of every great civilization, a moment before the silence, when the last voices still echo through the ruins and the air still remembers the sound of human intent. That moment may last a day, a decade, or a century, but it always arrives. It is not destruction that defines the end, but forgetfulness. The earth does not rage against its children, it simply waits, patient and absolute, until their echoes fade into the wind. Perhaps that is what the Silurian Hypothesis is truly about. Not the search for proof, but the recognition that forgetting is the planet's natural state. It invites us to imagine the impossible, that countless civilizations have come and gone, erased not by war or fire, but by time's quiet indifference. It challenges us to see that the earth itself might be the ultimate historian, its memory written not in words or monuments, but in chemistry, in the thin molecular scars of transformation. We spend so much of our lives believing we are writing the first chapter of human story. Yet, if deep time is a cycle, then our age is merely one iteration in a sequence older than imagination. Civilizations rise not to dominate, but to express the same impulse, an ancient longing embedded in matter itself, the desire to know, to build, to dream. That longing burns bright, then fades, leaving behind only residue, the isotopic memory of curiosity. Somewhere in that residue, the planet remembers every question ever asked. When the first astronomers looked to the stars, they were unknowingly retracing the same gesture that countless beings before them must have made, the upward gaze of wonder. Perhaps on some prehistoric Earth, millions of years before us, another species stood beneath a different sky, gazing upward and asking the same question. Are we alone? Maybe they built their own machines, studied their own atoms, wrestled with their own paradoxes. And when their time ended, as all times do, the earth folded their story into stone, waiting for the next civilization to arrive and ask again. We are that next civilization. And the question still hangs in the air. This realization reframes what it means to be human. We are not unique because we build or think or create. We are unique because we remember that others might have done so too. The awareness of impermanence is our inheritance. The Silurian Hypothesis does not diminish us. It dignifies us. It places us in a continuum of consciousness stretching across epochs, reminding us that our role is not to conquer history, but to contribute to it, even if our contribution is destined to vanish. What then is our responsibility to the future? If we are destined to be forgotten, why does it matter how we live? The answer lies in the same paradox that defines all life. Transience gives meaning. A civilization that knows it will be erased has two choices: to despair or to create beauty anyway. The artists of Altamira painted on cave walls knowing their pigments would fade. The builders of Stonehenge raised their stones not to defy time, but to converse with it. Perhaps that is the secret of endurance, not permanence but resonance, to leave behind something that echoes, however faintly, through the strata of memory. In a strange way, we already speak to the future. Our cities, our satellites, our synthetic molecules, all are messages written into the Earth's surface. We may not choose the language, but we choose the tone. Every chemical we release, every structure we build, becomes part of the planet's next version of history. We are authors, whether we mean to be or not. Imagine, then, a civilization far beyond us, tens of millions of years in the future, discovering the faint remains of our age. They would not find books or statues. They would find carbon isotopes, fragments of plastic polymer, perhaps a single probe drifting between the stars. They would study these remnants and wonder who we were. They might see our short existence as a warning, or as inspiration. Perhaps that is the truest immortality available to any civilization, to become a question in the mind of another. The Silurian Hypothesis transforms science into philosophy because it dissolves the boundary between past and future. It suggests that time is not linear but recursive, that the same questions repeat themselves in different forms, each asking to be answered anew. What we call progress might simply be memory resurfacing. What we call innovation might be recollection disguised as discovery. If that is so, then perhaps the next civilization is already being born, quietly, imperceptibly, in ways we cannot yet measure. It might not be human. It might not even be biological. It could be the planet itself, evolving consciousness beyond our form. The same force that created us might now be creating something new, something that will remember us as myth. To think in these terms is not hopeless. It is liberating. It allows us to see the grandeur of impermanence, to understand that our small lives are part of a far larger story. We are the fleeting voice of the earth, speaking itself into awareness for a moment. And that awareness is enough. It is tempting to believe that knowledge alone can save us, that if we study the past, we can avoid its mistakes. But perhaps the point is not to escape the cycle, but to complete it with grace. Every civilization ends, but not everyone learns to end well. The difference lies in consciousness, whether we face our impermanence with fear or with reverence. The greatest civilizations of the past left not warnings, but wisdom disguised as myth. The flood, the fall, the return, all of them are stories of renewal. They tell us that even when everything is lost, life begins again, that every extinction is a transition, every silence a pause between verses. The earth does not grieve its lost children. It carries them within its next creation. Perhaps that is why our age feels so anxious, because deep down we sense that we are approaching that transition again. Climate change, mass extinction, political collapse, all are not merely crises, but symptoms of transformation. The planet is shifting, and with it our idea of what civilization means. The old paradigm, domination, consumption, expansion, cannot continue. Something new must emerge, or nothing will. If we are wise, we will choose to evolve consciously, to create not monuments of stone, but systems of balance, to treat our technology not as weaponry, but as extension of ecology, to remember that the future will not judge us by what we built, but by what we left living. Perhaps that is how we break the pattern, not by surviving forever, but by leaving the Earth better prepared for whatever comes next. In doing so, we would become not the forgotten civilization, but the remembered one, the age that learned. In this sense, the Silurian Hypothesis is both prophecy and mirror. It shows us what might have been and what still could be. It is not asking us to believe in lost empires, but to see the fragility of our own. To look upon our skyscrapers and realize they are no different from coral reefs, temporary architectures of energy and desire, destined to dissolve back into the ocean of time. And yet, even knowing that, we build. We create art. We send probes into the void. We love. That, perhaps, is the most extraordinary defiance of all. The insistence on meaning in a universe that forgets. Maybe that is what makes humanity different from whatever came before. Maybe our purpose is not to last, but to witness. To stand at the edge of extinction and say, "We saw beauty here. We understood what it meant to exist." If the planet could speak, it might answer softly. So did they all. And maybe, one day, when the layers of rock have closed over us, and a new intelligence emerges to wonder about its own origins, the Earth will tell them our story, not in words, but in patterns of light and element. It will whisper through the minerals, through the air, through the ancient pulse of the sea. There was once a species that dreamed it could remember forever. And in its dreaming, it gave the world new life. Perhaps that is the final gift of every civilization, to give the next one something to wonder about, to ensure that curiosity survives, even when memory does not. Because in the end, that is what makes history sacred. It is not the names or the monuments that matter, but the questions that persist. And as long as there are questions, the cycle continues. Perhaps that is eternity, not a single unbroken story, but an infinite conversation between civilizations, each asking the same thing in a different tongue. Who were we? Why did we fall? And who will rise next? The answer is not in the stars, nor in the soil. It is in the silence that connects them. This is deformed history.